Patagonia was a founding member of that movement. We've been giving away 1% of our revenue for a long time. We have a decent amount of revenue, so it's given away a lot. And over the years, Land Institute was a big recipient of our grants with, the mandate of like, make this grain with its benefits to the soil, to the carbon in the atmosphere, to the environment, yield enough delicious, high nutrition grains that it can become commercially interesting. And it's taken a long time. And by the way, it's not done yet. Like, Kerns is still too expensive relative to other grains, but it is now commercially available.
Welcome to Brands for a Better World, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the people and products building a more just, healthy, and regenerative future for us all. Tune in weekly, and together, we'll learn about why these better products and brands were created, how they're helping fix broken systems, and what you can do to support them. My hope is that you'll discover some new brands to love and get some sparks of inspiration that will help you live your best life. Hi, I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, founder of Modern Species, a sustainable brand design agency helping better brands grow to scale their impact. If you like this show, please help it grow by leaving ratings and reviews on your podcast app and by sharing your favorite episodes with your friends. Maybe this will be one of them. This episode's guest is Paul Lightfoot, General Manager of Patagonia Provisions, and we talk about the reason a company known for jackets went into food, how they came to partner with respected breweries across the country to make regenerative organic beer possible, why a small cracker company became their first brand acquisition ever, and what excites Paul most about the Regenerative Organic Movement. We then wrap up with a fun Patagonia-themed rapid-fire question segment. Enjoy!
I'm Paul Lightfoot. I am the General Manager of Patagonia Provisions, which is the food and beverage division of the company better known for apparel, Patagonia. I'm also the board chair of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited to have this conversation. Obviously, big fan of Patagonia's business ethos, and I've been following all the different ventures Patagonia has been going on. I'm a member of 1% for the Planet, for example, which was also
Right.
kind of a Patagonia-born type of initiative. So been following that for a long time, and I'm excited to geek out a little bit more on the Patagonia Provisions, which is the newer of the Patagonia family, even though it's been around for a while. So for those of the listeners out there who still think of Patagonia as just the maker of some beautifully made jackets, can you explain a little bit like why a clothing company decided to start a food company?
Of course. And of course, I still think of Patagonia as a company that makes jackets.
Yeah.
I wear them all the time. So the answer is actually quite simple. And, and it started with Yvonne Chenard, who, whose idea was the inspiration for what is Patagonia Provisions now. The mission of Patagonia is really simple and amazingly purpose-driven, which is to save our home planet. Although we're in business to save our home planet, right? And, it's important. We're not a nonprofit. We're in business to save our home planet. And if you really think about the meaning of that, in this current generation of sort of the seasons of mankind, it's really the climate crisis that we have to focus on. Right. Hopefully that'll not be the case in 100 years, but it's the case probably for the rest of my life. And if you think about what we can be aspirational about with apparel or with gear, the aspiration is to get to zero impact or as close to zero as we can get. But you can imagine that in any sort of theoretical construct, it's not going to be easy to get beyond zero. Agriculture can go beyond zero, right? And this is sort of the attractiveness of being in the food space. Regenerative organic agriculture can actually make things better. It can improve the biodiversity of a landscape. It can improve the soil organic matter. It can improve the amount of water that the soil holds. It can clean the waterways around farms. It can improve the lives of farmers. And in addition, it can draw carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the ground or in biomass. And so when Patagonia is introspective about what it can do to truly fulfill its mission, it's hard to ignore the promise of food and agriculture, which is, depending on how you count it, at least a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and is ruining ecosystems around the country and around the world. So that's why Patagonia got into the food business. And we're pretty simple about what our aims are in the food business. We're like all Patagonia products. We start with quality. It has to be the best tasting, most nutritious food possible. If it's not, nothing else will really work. It's what we believe. Right. And then it's really finding products and markets to be in that create market demand for farmers and fishers that are doing things the responsible way, giving them a chance to get paid fairly for the good work of protecting the environment and regenerating the environment. So that's how we decide, where to play and what products to make.
Yeah, I love that for multiple reasons. And one thing I like to plant first is a quote that I think I found on the Patagonia Provisions website, potentially. But to kind of touch on exactly what you were discussing, it was Yvonne had a quote that said, people buy a jacket every few years, but they eat several times a day. If we're going to save our home planet, it starts with food, right? And that's part of why I end up focusing on food, too, because I also would love to support sustainable fashion and renewable energy and all these kind of things that are all really important, right? But at the end of the day, food is connected to everything and extracts so many resources and is so connected to climate change and the climate solutions for climate change that it's such a great place to focus if you can only pick one. So I love that. Like that was kind of a similar logic. It's so ubiquitous that why not work on it?
The multifacetedness of food, we've just talked about food for the sake of fighting the climate crisis. But of course, the same food that is better for the planet is in every case better for your health as well, right?
Right.
And so that's like a win-win of all times. And in almost all cases, it's going to be really great for your taste buds also. So this is
right.
and better for the farmers. It's like the only losers are the food processors and middlemen and the feedlot beef industry. And they can go to hell as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's better for health, like you say. It's better for the environment. It's better for social justice. It's just connected to everything. Economy, right? Like it's just a huge, wicked problem to solve. So I love that Patagonia jumped in to say, you know what? If we're not focused on the first solution we came up with, which is, beautiful jackets, clothing, gear, etc., what are the other potential solutions for saving our home planet? And you're not limiting yourself to that initial vision, which I think is both like a great reminder for a mission-driven business that it's about the mission. It's not about the first product you create, right? But then it's also just a good business principle. Like if you're focused more on the problems you're solving, there's a million different solutions to that. Yeah. And you can stay really viable and kind of stretch your brand and go in different markets or do whatever you need to. And it still feels relevant for the brand because the brand is focused around the mission, not the products, right?
Yeah.
Love that. So jumping into this space, I think you started in 2012. Can you talk a little bit about that journey of, deciding that Patagonia wanted to go into food and then some of what that journey's entailed so far? Like I know you mentioned fishers, like you've got a lot of fish products, but then you've also experimented with different ways to tackle food. I seem to remember there was like a kind of a Patagonia regenerative brands marketplace for a little while that was going on, which I don't think is still happening on the website, but then you've got various other products. So can you talk a little bit about the journey, like where that first assumption was and how you got to where you are today?
It's not easy for a company of Patagonia's scale to do something in an industry with a totally different business model. And when I say totally different, there's a fundamental shift, right? Like in our apparel business, we don't use the word consumer because we don't like the concept of consumption. We want you to buy a jacket and own it for 7 years, get it repaired, and then own it for another 7 years, right? So we ran an ad once that said, don't buy this jacket, right? Buy fewer jackets. That's not the way to think about food because as you said earlier, everybody has to eat every day. So we can get people to shift their daily habits from food that's not produced responsibly to food that is produced responsibly. We actually want them to consume more of it. We don't want them to consume more calories, but we just want them to shift, right? So it's not easy. And that's part of why the provisions division of Patagonia was put in a different location. We're in Northern California instead of Southern California. But, the organization from the founder to the CEO has been committed to it. And, 2012 is when the business began. It didn't get into the market for a few more years after that. And it was given a really wide latitude and a mandate to be really, really innovative and creative. And that's what it
Mm.
did. It sort of scoured the earth for really interesting opportunities. I'll give a couple examples, right? You brought up seafood. We have really high sourcing standards for our seafood. Like, and the ratings that are out there and the other certifications generally aren't high enough for us, which means that there's very little that can meet our standards. But we have found some great sources of mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and mussels in Spain, and some salmon from the Pacific Northwest that do meet our standards. And we've created versions of that are doing great, right? Like our tinned fish mussels didn't really exist in the marketplace until we brought it to American consumers. And it's been a tiger by the tail, effectively, right? So it's doing good in the world, but it's also really doing well in the marketplace. Similarly, for years, we provided grants to a nonprofit called the Land Institute that was working on a grain called kernza. It's a perennial grain instead of an annual grain. So that's not what people think about. They're thinking about, wheat and other things that every year, you have to often, sort of till the soil and replant. You leave kernza in the ground for 3 to 5 years, and it has very long root systems. It's just better for building the health of the soil, and therefore better to help fight the environmental crisis. So that was basically what the company did, was find ways to find these innovative supply chains and bring them to the market in a way that really satisfied our customers. And I think that the business was really successful at doing that. My mandate when I came in a year and a half ago was, we've got this great foundation, and now it's time to make it commercially scalable. And so that's really
Right.
on me, is to sort of rationalize these exciting, innovative products, to really focus on the ones that are the highest quality, the best for the planet, and that have really high product market fit, that the people who love the Patagonia brand will continue to buy and put in their pantry, and to scale the business.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. So there's like an early stage of, let's just explore and look for the most impactful food ingredients or supply chains, or whatever we possibly can, and then bring that to market and do some testing, like make sure that we're bringing something that consumers want. But it was more of an exploratory phase, and then you're shifting into now let's take those best products and find a way that's like to make it scalable, which I think not all impactful stuff is ultimately scalable, right? Sometimes impact is like, keep it small and local. So it's a different kind of focus.
And sometimes, by the way, we try to do both at the same time. Like, we have this beer program where we partner with regional high quality, values aligned brewers, and we let them produce and distribute the beer in their markets. And that actually keeps it small and scales at the same time, which is, an unusual thing to do, but we're thrilled with how that program is going so far.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of the things I wanted to talk about as a craft beer nerd. But also, like, when I first saw Patagonia Provisions, I can't remember where I was, maybe in a Patagonia store or something like that. And I saw like maybe like some soup mixes or something like that. It just felt like, oh, they're making, like, if you're going outdoors, like, bring some, more sustainable food with you or something. And then the next time I saw it, I'm pretty sure it was at an Expo West, when some of the buzz of like shooting the original, Kiss the Ground film was coming up, and there was a party doing a little preview screening, and then Long Root Beer shows up. I think it was what it was called at that time, kind of featuring that Kernza beer, and like literally showing how long these roots are, which were just kind of like massive roots, right? So the beer program was like one of my second intros into the Patagonia Provisions as a company. And I was really curious about how that would grow and scale, because I'm like, Patagonia making a beer? That's kind of weird, but okay, let's see where this goes. And then to see more recently how robust the program has become, partnering with all these breweries, and including, I'm in the Washington State area, so including kind of a local favorite of Aslan, fellow B Corp, fellow organic advocate, and also a new client too, someone we've been working with as well. So it's like fun to see that kind of all that stuff coming together. But let's talk about that program a little bit more. Like, how did you first even find Kernza? Like, how did that become a thing? And then why beer? Like, why wasn't it like Kernza granola or something else like that? Like, how did that process come about?
Well, let me answer the second question first, because it is more than just beer. So we're actually releasing 3 pasta SKUs at this year's Expo, or 2024. each made with Kernza, and we're going to continue to expand Kernza in our product portfolio. So we're a big believer in Kernza, and any food company that calls us, we'll give them all intellectual property. We'll tell them everything we know, because we believe in Kernza beyond our own business. And now, like, how did Kernza happen? I don't even know that I know the complete answer, right? But there was a terrific leader of that nonprofit, the Land Institute, named Wes Jackson. And I'm going to guess that Yvonne Chenard and he got to know each other because they both cared about, natural solutions to fighting the environmental crisis. And, you mentioned 1% for the planet earlier. Patagonia was a founding member of that movement. We've been giving away 1% of our revenue for a long time. We have a decent amount of revenue, so it's given away a lot. And over the years, Land Institute was a big recipient of our grants with, the mandate of, like, make this grain with its benefits to the soil, to the carbon in the atmosphere, to the environment, yield enough delicious, high nutrition grains that it can become commercially interesting. And it's taken a long time. And by the way, it's not done yet. Like, Kernza is still too expensive relative to other grains, but it is now commercially available. We have farmers growing it for us, for our pasta, for our beer, and soon for other products as well. And this is a very sort of unusual for the world, but common for Patagonia thing. We spent years giving away money before we made money out of it, because we just believed in the concept. We didn't wake up Kernza people. We heard about the work they were doing and just supported them until it was ready to bring to market.
Well, that's an important note too, because sometimes the best solutions are just solutions that aren't ready yet, right? But we still have to find a way to get them ready. You can't just disclude them from your portfolio because they're not at scale or they're too expensive. And it takes bigger companies like Patagonia to be able to say, you know what, we can afford to invest in getting this to scale. Whereas some of the small brands starting out, like, they can't necessarily afford to pay those high prices or to just write checks to farmers to fund them growing this program, right? So it's great that bigger companies like yourself are taking a leadership position saying, we need more Kernza in the food supply system. It's not there yet. We'll help make it happen.
The distinction is not necessarily between small and big companies. We're not that big in the scale of the food industry. And I don't mean just the food part of Patagonia. I mean, all of Patagonia is not that big. And there are plenty of big companies that aren't doing shit on this topic, right? So I think really the distinction is, like, companies that are willing to make very long-term choices, right? And Yvonne Chenard, he has a handful of like maxims that are true and timeless. And one of them is the idea that if you do the right thing, even if it doesn't seem like it's good for you today financially, in the long run, it always pays off. And he learned that, the hard way by suffering through things for years until it paid off. But it really has paid off, right? And that's the kind of thing we're willing to do with Kernza. And it's also, by the way, a risk. Like, we could have plunked money into it for years and it not worked out. And that's something we're willing to do also. And we wake up every day and say to ourselves, when we think about these sorts of opportunities, like, if we don't do this, who will, right? That's sort of our role in the world, is to take the longer view, take the risks, and support the good actors. Because if we don't do it, maybe it won't get done.
Stuff. Maybe we're focused on the wrong stuff. What if we could do better with the stuff we buy? Support businesses that do the right thing for the planet, create less waste, rebuild ecosystems, and protect the land and its natural resources. Give gifts that are more thoughtful and more thoughtfully made, promoting safe working conditions, fair wages, and diverse communities. Good business exists if you know where to look. Don't give the wrong stuff this holiday season. Give the good stuff. With the Impact-Driven Gift Guide, we've made giving good easy.
I love that kind of mindset, but also a good point on, like, it's not always big or small. It's just, maybe it's more of a level of, if you have profits, because sometimes companies can be big but not profitable. Like, there's some really good examples of that in the marketplace right now, where they're bleeding millions of dollars off of their hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. But anyway, So the fact that you're like making profit
Yeah.
and using that profit
yeah.
for good, that's
Yeah.
the cool part, right?
Yeah.
So Kernza, so obviously a great grain, from a sustainability and nutrition standpoint, as you said. And then it just happened to be potentially a good source for beer. So you built this program. I don't know how much you know about the whole transition of that program, but how did this whole collaborative model happen? I know like Patagonia is not a brewery, so the first collaboration had to be let's collaborate with one brewery. But now you've got, I can't remember how many, let's say 20 breweries or something in this program, right?
Yeah. So we actually did several iterations of trials over the course of several years to see really what it was like in the marketplace, right? Like we had and we have a thesis that Patagonia customers are beer drinkers, right? The mountain bikers, the surfers, the skiers, these are people who might be sleeping in their van and drinking beer. It is the customer that we're thinking about, right? So it wasn't hard to imagine that beer would be a product that our customers would want. Thinking about how to get a market was different, right? We didn't want to own a brewery. That's not really the
Right.
Patagonia way. And, we hit upon this model because we knew that we wanted deep partnerships, right? Like we're not an organization that does things in a transactional style, or we don't do things for this season, right? That's just not our style, right? We don't believe in fashion, really, right? So we wanted to find partners that were values aligned with us and that had strength in their marketplace, and that when we entered the craft brewing industry, we wouldn't be offsetting any good guys, right? Like the craft beer industry rose like wild for a long time, but it's not rising right now. And so we didn't want to come in a way and harm anybody either, because, the values aligned small craft brewers are good people that we like. And frankly, we were friends with many of them already, right? Companies like Aslan or Topa Topa and Ventura. And so we struck upon this as a way to both lift up the types of organizations that we loved and wanted to support and get high quality beer out into many places at once. If we built a brewery and started scaling slowly, it would take us years to get a lot of Kernza planted in the ground and into the hands of beer drinkers. And now we have 11 today and soon more than 20 that are all buying Kernza, on their own from our approved suppliers and getting Kernza beer into the hands of beer drinkers who are now thinking about Kernza. They might not have been otherwise. And that was why we struck upon this model, recognizing that it was really unorthodox and, potentially risky, potentially too complex, but somehow it's working out, and it's been a beautiful project for us.
Well, I mean, it's smart in multiple ways, right? Like a lot of businesses start up not having their own manufacturing, or in this case, a brewery, and they hire a co-manufacturer or something like that, someone that will do the manufacturing for them. They manage the brand and maybe recipes, and the co-man kind of creates the product. So that's a pretty common model already. Yep. But then that often it's like white labeled, right? Nobody knows who makes your food. You just, you don't even share that info typically. But for you, like being a more community driven, a more collaborative brand, you said, you know what? Yeah, we're not going to start our own brewery, which we could just white label and not tell anyone who's making this beer and act like it's ours. But instead you took a more community approach and said, why don't we just make this a true partnership with these breweries? And then it could have, again, been one national brewery that you partnered with that distributes everywhere. But instead you took a more community approach and found breweries in different regions, which is really cool and just kind of just shows the values. But I imagine, like all collaboration, it probably makes the end product that much better too, right? Because then you're getting all those brains, all those brewers, all those communities involved in seeing whether this beer works or finding better ways to make it work or getting the price down or whatever else. So it's a really smart model.
Yeah. There's something else that's going on here too, though. When you are a growth stage food company, not Patagonia, that works with co-packers, in many cases, you're working on the recipes with the co-packers, and then they're dealing with the supply chains. They're calling the brokers and they're calling the commodity markets. We don't have that opportunity because our products are all based on regenerative organic ingredients, and there aren't really commodity markets for these ingredients. Right. So we actually, in almost every case, work directly with the farmer or the fisher, and we therefore want to tell their stories. Like we're not most food companies couldn't tell the stories of their farmers because they don't know who their farmers are. But knowing who our farmers are is sort of like at the essence of our business model. And in every case, we Luke Peterson in Minnesota is growing our Kernza for our pasta and our beer. I love Luke, and I love his wife Allie, and I've drank a beer with his dad on the farm that his dad grew up on. Like we
Nice.
want to tell their story and support them, partly because we can and because we're super values aligned with them.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, there's, like, I think some companies want to diversify their supply chain and maybe they're just going through brokers or something like that for sustainability standpoint of like, oh, well, what happens if this crop doesn't turn out on this one farm? Like the I think a lot of people have been talking about the whole sriracha shortage from the kind of dispute over the growers of the chilies that were dependent on the main brand, spacing on what they're called, Hui Fong Foods or something like that. But so like there are risks in that like direct relationship sometimes, right? But it also makes the relationship more meaningful because you can actually commit to each other in a better way and say, you know what, we are going to buy this. It's not just some commodity market where you may or may not get the price that you need to be able to sell this. We're going to make a longer term commitment with you and work with you to grow this supply chain over time. So pros and cons, but by taking that path, you get to tell better stories.
Yeah. There is more risk in our supply chain, frankly, right? Because of the scarcity of suppliers. And that's just something that is hand in hand with true innovation. I mean, one of my first trips when I showed up here in 2022 was the guy, his name is Juan, who owns and runs our seafood processing facility in Galicia, Spain. And when we sat down, he was like, I'm really interested in meeting with you because your business is a big part of our business, and it makes me nervous. And I said, well, that makes two of us then. Like, you're a big part of my business. So let's agree to be nervous together and let's keep trusting each other and let's keep working together.
That's an interesting process. Like what came to my mind is let's be mutually nervous. It's like investing in people. And I have this, I had a sticky on my desk for a long time just to always remember this idea that there's that well-known, I don't think it's a quote, a saying that it's not business, it's personal, right? But I had this sticky on my desk that said, it's not just business, it's always personal. Because even when you're working with businesses, you're working with people, right? And people at those businesses depend on those paychecks or whatever else. So I think that kind of let's be mutually nervous is like maybe sometimes if a cold-hearted business person were to come in, they'd be like, you need to diversify your supply chain. But if you're taking the approach to businesses or people and people are dependent on these businesses, then being a little mutually nervous and embracing that discomfort is probably a stronger way to go. Yeah, you could get hurt or you could really benefit each other.
Right. And in that case, by the way, it was mostly a joke, right? What we were really saying was, let's really trust each other, right? You're the new leader, Paul, and I'm glad you showed up here because I need to trust you and you need to trust me. And boy, we do actually. We do trust each other. And it's a wonderful, beautiful thing. That business has been growing strongly, by the way, to both of our benefit. And a guy on our operations team said to me recently, the partnership feels too good to be true. Is that wrong? And I said, no, that's what happens when things work and you're with people that you trust, right? There's not some pie we're splitting it between the two of us. We're both benefiting from, the right things happening.
But it's the fact that you were willing to have that conversation and even crack the jokes about being nervous, right? I think it's the being willing to talk about that instead of in the back boardrooms being like, "Ooh, I'm getting nervous about this. We better start behind the scenes looking for some other options." I was just reading the Nike book, Shoe Dog, I think it was. Yeah. And there were so many stories in there, right, about backstabbing each other and oh, well, we don't know how this contract's going, so we're going to go look for some other people. On both sides, they were playing each other, right? And that's the contrast to what you were talking about, where you just face to face said, you know what, this makes me a little nervous, but if I express that and we can talk about it, maybe we can both relieve our anxiety and reassure each other, right? But just being willing to have that conversation face to face, I think is important.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about the beer, but another product that I know you're pushing a lot right now is the crackers. So I know you recently acquired Moonshot. So again, like, why crackers? Like, we talked about why beer before, but like, why was crackers the next space to invest in?
Well, it didn't start with the idea that it's crackers, by the way. Like, of course, we needed to be in a category where we thought we could succeed, but the motivation didn't come from the product at all. The motivation came from two areas. One was that the Moonshot team had created this amazing ecosystem in their supply chains up in the Skagit Valley of Washington, starting with a farm called Headland Farms and a mill named Cairn Spring Mills that supports local farmers up there, and a co-packer up there that was making the crackers. And that ecosystem was completely modeled on our belief system. Not because they had studied us, by the way. They had the same belief system that we did. And so we're in the business of finding market opportunities to support regenerative organic farms. And these guys had that. So Headland Farms, which by coincidence, during that partnership with Moonshot, by the way, we required them to create a plan to convert that farm to Regenerative Organic Certified. It was already organic. It was already regenerative. They just hadn't done the paperwork. It just got completed on Friday, actually. So
nice.
I guess this is my announcement, right? It just got their final certification completed. So everybody told the truth and did the right thing because these are people that we love and trust. And that was what brought us to them. And then the team, and Patagonia never does acquisitions. Like there was no template to pull off a shelf and to use, because no one could remember the last time Patagonia had done an acquisition. It is not an organization that does it well because it never finds other organizations that really are weird like we are, right? And that's what we found in this team from Moonshot. We brought over the small team of 4 fantastically talented women that had built this little business within another business. So we sort of brought the unit over. That was exactly like the way we wanted to be. And so it was that regenerative supply chain, that great team of people that we brought on, and it's been a match made in heaven. This is one of these unusual stories. When they joined us, I remember sitting down with our entire staff and saying, this isn't one of these deals where a larger organization brings on a smaller one and we tell them to assimilate. This is the sort of arrangement where this smaller team is coming in and we're going to assimilate to the way that they're doing things because they're really, really, really good. And they were better than us in a lot of ways. And they've made us a lot better. And man, I could not be happier about it. Like that was a lucky thing.
Yeah, that's a fun story to hear, like how that happened, that it was more of a values aligned supply chain ethos and all that kind of stuff. And then it just happened to make sense as a business. Because I did read that it was the first and I think only acquisition of Patagonia provisions, but I hadn't stopped to think about like, well, what about Patagonia as a whole? How often are they acquiring?
Yeah, we never do acquisitions. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of I guess, can I candidly ask, is this part of like a new plan going forward? Do you think you'll make more acquisitions, or was that kind of like a one-off, just the stars aligned and it made sense?
So I never say never, right? Because I'm walking around with the beginner's mind that is open to all sorts of things. But it was not a strategy. We were not out looking for an acquisition. We were talking to people and fell in love with these people and thought to ourselves, could we partner in a way that would be good for us and good for them? But we're also not now looking for others as well.
Gotcha. And then I was actually I'm excited to hear about the new ROC kind of conversion there, because I was going to ask about where the regenerative side fits into their brand, because I know it's organic, but I was looking at the packaging. I'm like, oh, but it's not ROC yet. I wonder when that's going to happen. So congrats on that.
As soon as the next run of labels is created, it'll say Regenerative Organic Certified. By the way, there's a coincidence that I didn't know until recently. Patagonia Provisions made a film in 2016, and I think it was called Unbroken Ground. And it was about a series of farmers that were doing things in a way that we wanted to spotlight and highlight for viewers. And Dave Headland of Headland Farms was in the film. And years later, he became the supplier of regenerative organic wheat to Moonshot. And then Moonshot partnered with Patagonia Provisions. And it was like, no one could have predicted that would have happened, right? But it just shows you just got a group of people I mean, the community is not that large, right? But a group of people that were values aligned, sort of rowing their boats in the right direction at the same time, and all joined up.
Yeah, I love those coincidences. And I did just fact check you, and you're correct. It's Unbroken Ground, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. So if anyone's listening now and wants to watch it, they can.
Yeah.
But finish the episode first before you click over. Cool. So obviously, we've been talking a lot about the ethos of Patagonia and Patagonia Provisions, but one of the phrases I saw on your website was regenerate, rejoice, restore. So what does that mean to you?
Well, regenerate is the first word there and the most important word for us, right? Because that gets us to why we exist on Earth, right? Which is to build demand for regenerative farms, right? So farms that regenerate life in the soil, and the other two are about being humans and how food impacts our lives. The beauty of food, as you said earlier, is that you eat every day, but it's an amazingly important social activity, right? It's the way families come together and holidays are celebrated and milestones are celebrated. So rejoicing, it's just a great thing that you can work in on something that's the climate, but you can also work in a way that brings joy to people. And what was the last one?
Restore.
Yeah, I mean that obviously can mean two things. It can mean restoring the health of the ocean and of the soil, but it also can mean restoring who we are and how we are, almost like in a slow food kind of meaning. So all those words together, with which I can see is done nicely with alliteration, is part of just the joy of being in this business.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's because I think sometimes slogans or taglines or headlines are written just because they sound cool, but I could tell that one had a little bit more meaning to it. Obviously the regenerate one, but like the rejoice and restore, it's fun to hear kind of how you're thinking about that and how it comes to life through the brand and your business decisions and so on and so forth. So I know that we're talking a lot about regenerative here, but regenerative also it's important for regenerative to be organic too, right? And you're sitting on the board of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is kind of setting the standards for what it means to be regenerative organic. So you have front row seats to how that movement is growing. So what excites you most, like about the regenerative movement picking up steam? Because, there's movies being produced, there's brands jumping on board, there's the certifications popping up left and right, so on and so forth. So like we're getting some real momentum. So what's exciting about that for you?
Yeah, it's easy. It's an easy answer for me to come up with, right? I'm excited when I look at the syndicated data that we can get, and then the natural channel it's coming from spins. And so this is the data that's showing up in supermarket cash registers. And what we're seeing is that regenerative organic certified products are growing at a rate of 12%, while organic products are growing at 5%. So more than twice the rate of growth. And they're commanding a material price premium, which, price premiums aren't always good, right? But it shows you that the demand is strong right now for regenerative organic certified. And that's the most important thing. Like if consumers didn't want this stuff, we would just be sitting here talking, right? But it is a movement because consumers are going for it. And when I think about the really big picture, and I think about the history of the food movement, I actually like to look at analogies to organic, because regenerative organic right now is in its early days, like organic was when standards were being set, like in the 90s. And the difference is that I don't know that most people really could pinpoint exactly why they were buying organic food. Polling or surveying tells us that it was because people had a sense it was better for their health and better for the planet. But they didn't have a real clear connection between the two things. That's not the case with regenerative organic. Right now, there's almost no one left who has eyes and ears and is thoughtful that doesn't know someone who's been negatively impacted by the climate crisis. That wasn't the case 5 years ago, but today everybody knows that we're fucked and that we better do something about it. And regenerative organic certified food is the answer, right? It's not the only answer. We have transportation and energy problems to solve as well. But in the food and agriculture industry, it's regenerative organic, and people get that. So I think you're going to see a bigger and faster adoption curve with ROC than we saw with organic. And that's what's got me really excited. Now, there's a second part of your question that you didn't ask, but I'll anticipate you might, which is, what am I not excited about?
Yeah.
And I'm not excited that the word regenerative is being co-opted by some organizations. And I won't name names, but like Nestle and Unilever, for example, both have products and programs that they're calling regenerative. I think in one of them, it's a frozen pizza dough wheat. They're saying they have a regenerative supply chain that's already 7% regenerative. And in Unilever's case, I think it's they're saying they have a huge amount of regenerative soy going into a mayonnaise product. And in both cases, they're defining regenerative as having cover cropping or no tilling in their farming practices. And I am hugely in support of cover cropping and not using tillage, right? Like I want them to get credit for that. I want them to have incentives for that. I want to celebrate that with them. But when they're using synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and they're not using the full suite of regenerative practices, they're not really building up life. They're not really regenerating. And by using the word regenerative, even if it's a lowercase r, they're basically destroying the meaning of the word regenerative, but the market opportunity for farmers that are doing things the responsible way, using the full suite of practices, which costs more. And we need to have the demand signal to consumers so that they pay a little bit more so we can pass it on to the regenerative organic farmers. And so I'm dismayed to see the word being used in ways that I think are irresponsible.
Right. I guess that kind of illustrates the pros and cons of growing a movement via like government and policies and standards that can be legally fought or are controlled in some way, like organic was, right? Like brought in as a national program where you're legally not even allowed to use the word organic unless you meet certain criteria. Whereas right now, there's no law saying you can't use the word regenerative for anything. And then some brands therefore take that leniency and say, well, we're doing one of the 6, principles or one of the whichever standard you're looking at. So let's just say we're being regenerative because we took like the first step, right? But that's the pro is that you can create more movement and get it moving faster because you don't have to take the time to bake it into law and policy and all that kind of stuff. So you can grow that movement faster. Like I think regenerative and upcycled are 2 movements I'm kind of really bought in on and supporting. And both of those are just skyrocketing in comparison to organic, like how long it took to get organic mainstream, for example. But the downside is anyone can say they're using upcycled or regenerative sources or something like that. Nobody's going to come slap their hand, which is why I feel like consumers, like anyone listening to this show, again, we don't want to call them consumers, but people who buy products and use them, that's why we like to raise awareness around things like the ROC certification, right? In our recent impact-driven gift guide, we chose to partner with ROC on that so we could feature brands that actually have that certification to differentiate between the brands that are just saying they're regenerative versus ones that are actually going through a process to get verified and following all the steps to be truly regenerative. So I think for people out there, like the best way to like cast your vote and to help that movement grow in the right way is to find brands that are certified. There are probably some great brands out there that are early in the stage and aren't certified yet. And if they're transparent and vulnerable and like sharing their whole supply chain, still support them on that journey. But whenever possible, I think if we find brands that actually have gone through the due diligence to get some certification, then that's a better way to go, because otherwise it's the Wild West, right?
100%.
Makes sense. So, so the regenerative movement is growing, which is super exciting. You mentioned it in large part because of people's connection to climate. So I mentioned upcycled, so I just want to plant that seed too, because that's also, according to Project Drawdown, one of the best ways to reduce or reverse climate change is by preventing food waste or kind of eliminating that problem. So like what I love about regenerative, it's like growing the food better in the first place. And then what I love about upcycling is use more of the food we actually grow. So between those two movements, I love tracking them. And we've got series in this podcast for both of those. So for any listeners, we've got playlists on YouTube or categories on our website. So check those out. With that said, we could geek out on regenerative and food and beer and stuff all day long, but I'm watching the clock and knowing we need to shift into our rapid round of fun, more personal questions to wrap up. So I'm just going to dive in there. So what is your favorite style of beer?
I like a light lager, and I don't just say that because that's the type of beer that we're making at Patagonia. It's the other way around. We're making it because it's people like me who are active and on the go and want to be able to drink a beer that's not going to make us need to take a nap.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a good note. All right. If you had to pick one food to eat every day for a year, what would it be?
Well, I could start with thinking about what food do I eat most often, right? I eat a lot of tinned fish. You won't be surprised to learn.
Oh, really?
You know, and I'll use an example like anchovies. You know, these are low on the food chain. These are the forage fish that are super resilient, and you know, we harvest them in a way that I think is super good for the oceans and for the species. So it's good impact wise. But it's just good for your health as well, right? These are the small fatty fish with lots of omega-3s. So if I had to eat something a lot, I'd want it to taste good, be something I can carry around, but also have it be really nutritious, and that's what that is.
Nice. Well, I have to ask, like, how are you eating them? Are you just like popping open
salads? I put them on salads. Yeah,
gotcha.
I am my job before this was in the salad industry. I'm a crazy salad guy. Yeah, so I eat a lot of salads.
I didn't realize that. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I guess one step deeper there. I know these are supposed to be rapid, but you got me curious. What's your favorite type of salad to put some tinned fish on?
I mean, again, I just look at my patterns, right? I tend to make salads with a mixture of romaine and baby spinach. You know, the nutrition of the spinach with the crunch and convenience of the romaine. I'm buying 3 heads of romaine, and I just in the morning before work, I put them in a salad spinner. I put them in my backpack with my bike and take it with me. Yeah.
Nice.
And I roast huge piles of vegetables on Sunday nights. So
I really?
throw piles of roasted vegetables in my salads as well. Yeah. I fell in love with an air fryer recently, by the way. I scoffed at those things for years, but now I'm like, man, my kids want me to make potatoes for breakfast. I make potatoes for breakfast. It's fast. It's easy.
That's cool. I've been thinking about getting one because they seem awesome and everyone raves about them, but I've been resistant because I just don't have the counter space or whatever. But I just got to go get it.
In the pantry. I pull it out of the pantry. It's not that big. No.
Yeah, that's cool. I also do a Sunday night meal prep thing too, where I just like cook a bunch of stuff. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. If you couldn't wear a Patagonia jacket, what brand would you choose?
This is a hard question, right? Like I would probably just freeze to death, right? I think a brand that I really like, I was wearing one of their shirts yesterday, is Outer Worn. I don't know if you know that brand. So it's these beautiful, mostly heavy shirts, almost shirts that are almost like jackets that are made with regenerative organic cotton. They're beautiful and comfortable, and I'm already wearing their stuff. And yeah, if I had to wear someone else's stuff, I'd wear more of theirs, I think.
Oh, well, I'm gonna have to go look that up. Thanks for the tip.
Outer Known, yeah, it's a funny word. Yeah, I don't actually know them personally. I don't even know where they're based, but I just admire their work and their products.
Well, we'll find out. Maybe put a link to it in the show notes. Okay, so who's an impact-driven leader that you really admire and why? And you can't say Yvonne.
It's such a joy to work with Yvonne. So it's
yeah. Well, that's just a default. Everyone says Yvonne. So yeah.
But I've changed my life for Yvonne, so it's different. But okay, I'll play along. It's still easy. My next one is easy too. It's Alice Waters. Who
nice.
I feel very lucky to have gotten to know since I moved out here, and I'll actually see her at an event on Sunday to support a nonprofit that we both care about. So I think a lot of the world thinks that Alice is in the business of creating beautiful meals for people so they can enjoy beautiful meals. But I don't think that's how Alice thinks about herself, and it's not how I think about her either. She is in the same business that I'm in with a different business model. She's in the business of creating opportunities for farms that are doing things responsibly. And, you know, I went for a walk once with her, and I was asking about her relationship with her main farm that supplies produce. And she basically said, I will buy everything they ever produce. That's the way we operate together. And I said, well, how do you set the price? How do you set the price then? She said, she said, you know, I trust Bob. Like I pay him the price that he says is fair because I trust him. And we've been doing it for 50 years.
50
right?
years, wow.
It's now the second generation. And so she really deeply, this isn't talk, right? She truly operates in a way where she exists for the sake of Bob, or really Bob's family, and their farm, and other farmers as well. And it just so happens that she's got this talent and these high standards for presenting the food in a way that made her world renowned. But at the end of the day, her values are about the farms and the farmers. And I love the simplicity of that. And I love the fact that doing good in business runs alongside with doing well in business. And I find myself inspired by her all the time. I have 2 ears and 2 shoulders, and on one shoulder is Yvonne, and on the other is Alice. And every time I come up with a hard challenge, I think about what they would say if they were in the room, and it really helps me make good choices.
That's cool. It's nice to have such inspirational people on each shoulder, but I can't help but thinking, like, often when you hear the 2 different people on your shoulder, like one's the more angel and one's the more devil, I kind of focus. So if you had to like do the devil's advocate or like hear both sides of the coin, which one would Yvonne be and which one would Alice be?
If I asked them which one of them would want to wear the devil hat, Yvonne would say he would put on the devil hat occasionally. I don't think Alice would.
Perfect. All right. So we call this show Brands for a Better World just because that's who we want to support and who we believe in. But what does better for the world mean to you?
Well, it's easy, right? Like my life calling is foods that are better for people's health and better for the health of the planet. So that's it. That's the start and the end of it for me. Very simple.
Love it. Well, awesome. I'm sure we could geek out for a lot more hours or minutes or whatever, but I'm trying to keep these episodes tighter. So I'll just wrap up here and just say, thank you so much for doing all the work you do to help support systems that create healthier and better for the world food. And thanks for sparing some time to come out here and share some of these stories and crack some jokes about Yvonne wearing devil hats or whatever else on the show. Really appreciate your time carving out to share the story here.
It was a joy and my pleasure. Thanks for the work that you're doing as well.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Patagonia Provisions, go to patagoniaprovisions.com. If you like this show, remember to help us grow by liking, reviewing, and sharing. If you're new here, don't forget we have over 100 episodes in the archive. Some might be called Evolve CPG, but it's the same show, so dig in for more goodness. If you consider yourself an impact-driven professional, join me over at impactdriven.community, where we're supporting each other's growth as impact leaders.